So thank you, Lord Merritt, and thank you everyone for being here. I really enjoy this opportunity to get to talk with you and have this conversation. Can everyone hear me back there okay? Is that okay? So this is special to me to be here. I have been to Queensland, Southeast Queensland a few times now, and I've actually gotten to be in Australia pretty much a couple times a year for the last 9 years or so. So I've actually learned a lot working in many different communities around here. Just to pick on someone in the audience, my first trip to Australia, I got to work with David Engwich here, who's someone who's actually inspired us around placemaking for more than 20 years, since I first got started in this work. And he's really well known actually in the U.S. and has done amazing work, amazing writing, leading a lot of important ideas. So it's exciting to have him in the audience as well. So our work, we're a not-for-profit organization, Project for Public Spaces. We've been around since 1975. My father actually founded the organization shortly after he organized Earth Day in 1970. So we sort of grew up around a lot of the sort of founders of the environmental movement. But he started looking at cities and places at a time in the 70s when people were really running from cities. And we sort of realized that cities were failing and succeeding at the human scale. And this focus had not been really considered or thought about by many people, how cities work for humans and how they work from a social perspective. So that's really been our lens, this place scale. And ever since the last 40 years, that lens has led us to learn a lot about how a focus on place can enable broader participation, can enable the convergence of many different issues and causes that many people are concerned about, and sometimes more effectively address many of those. So what I want to discuss with you tonight is how a focus on place can be a way to have really constructive conversations around the future of your community, how it can pull together and create collaboration, build capacity for better engagement between different issues, between government and communities, and also lead to really short-term actions that can make a big impact, but connect them to larger goals of your community and of the region. So this is really exciting. Your region is actually very advanced in the way it's doing this kind of regional planning around the world. I'm learning from it. And I'm really excited to see the model that you all developed together and how I think it can be replicated and shared around the world. But again, we think we shape our public spaces thereafter our public spaces shape us. It's our values, our use, our participation in spaces, the way we shop at businesses, the way we shape our businesses that are shaping our public spaces. And it's these public spaces that are shaping our identity, our connections in our community.
Interrupt for a second. I think a few people might be having a bit of trouble.
Would the mic be better? Sure.
Use the mic, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Is that better? So public spaces are shaping our identity, our connection to our communities. We don't realize the extent to which they're shaping how we feel about ourselves, our community, how it helps support and forge the connections we have in our community. But what we think is necessary is we say it takes a place to create a community and a community to create a place. It's this virtuous cycle between the two. You can't create a place alone without a community, but good places are actually the best way to actually build communities and build community connections. And there was recently a study on placemaking by MIT that found that the biggest benefit of placemaking isn't the better place, but the social capital, the connections, the community capacity that's built through that process. So we were really set up to put into practice the work of a man by the name of William White. He wrote a book called The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces. He was actually the editor of Fortune magazine in the 50s and 60s, and was one of the first people to identify the problem of urban sprawl and the breakdown of community and sort of happiness that was going along with that. But he also started to look at how people were running from cities and running from towns and main streets, and they were disinvesting in these places, and
how we need to understand how to make these places work and invite people back to them. One of the things he said is what attracts people most, it would appear, is other people. Simple, common sense perspective, but we often forget that. How do we, if people attract people, attract people? So, it's at the street corner level in front of the library. How do we get people to want to spend time to gather in front of that space? That's what's going to attract more people to that space. So over 40 years, we've developed many different means of evaluating public spaces and assessing them. And what we realized a long time ago is that that the community is the expert in how a public space works and what they like to do in it, what they think should be done in it. And so a lot of our work is simply just facilitating communities to evaluate their public spaces, to learn from each other, to articulate that. Some of the criteria of what makes a good place are sociability. Are there reasons to spend time in that space? Are there groups of people, women, children, elderly, the more vulnerable, discerning members of a community? Are there excuses? Does the space have a purpose? Does it have uses? Is it comfortable? Does it have an inviting image that reflects your identity, your values? And is it accessible? Is it linked? Can you walk there? Can you cross the street? Can you get there by transit and so forth? And it turned out that these same criteria of what make a good place, a recent study discovered, are the same criteria that lead to people being attached to a place. So the study had the people doing the study had never heard of placemaking, but they found that and they thought there was going to be a high correlation between sort of livability criteria, the economic standards and jobs and schools, but there was very little correlation. But those are important. People appreciate them, but it didn't lead to people being attached to the place. The three big factors that led to attachment were opportunities for social engagement, cultural openness, and aesthetics. So and it had to be a combination of those together. So you think about, in a way, what makes you perhaps fall in love with a person. It's you don't just fall in love with someone because they're beautiful. You fall in love with them also because you like engaging with them and they're open to you, right? So it's similar with a place. Now, why this is important is that they're finding that place attachment increasingly is a major factor in the success of a community. How people choose to invest in a place, be entrepreneurial in a place, contribute to that place. And in an age where people can sort of move where they like more than ever, it's places that attach people, that get people to fall in love with them, that are going to succeed the most in the future. So not just livable, not just having the same amenities as every other place, nice parks and jobs and schools and healthcare and whatnot. That's important. We like that. But what makes people love the place are these same qualities of good places, these social connections. So communities are having to really change to meet this goal. Where are the places where you're creating the opportunity for social engagement, and where people from various backgrounds feel welcome and different ages feel like they can be together and enjoy being together? These are the places that are leading to attachment and fostering and sustaining economic growth and entrepreneurship. But this attachment happens, I think, at this very small scale in many cases. We took these pictures of these artist-designed benches. We thought they were cool benches. But we realized they actually revealed a lot more about human behavior and our connection to place. Each person on the bench looked like they kind of matched the bench, it turned out. So these women look like they're very comfortable in that environment, and that maybe their home has a window box, or this guy on the left looks like he might be a pharmacist, and their decor from this bench maybe matches theirs in their home. But not only did they sit on the bench that matched their personality, but that bench brought that personality in them out further. And these people wore the right color pants, and the ones on the left, the likenesses were painted on the back of the bench for them. So it's almost subconscious, but we go to the places, whether it's a bench or we choose to live in the town that matches our personality and our values, but then that town further brings those out further. So, but again, people, and this bench was perfect for for these guys. So we shape our public spaces, thereafter our public spaces shape us. So we therefore need to further shape our spaces to reflect what we care about, what we love, to bring that out further in ourselves and our community and sustain those values, continue those values through the life of our communities. But the biggest limiting factor, there's a lot of limiting factors of what's preventing great places in this attachment and the lovability. The biggest perhaps is how we've allowed our communities to be taken over by automobiles. And we think we need, it's not about being against the car, but planning for cars and traffic has degraded a lot of the community connections, the safety, the comfort of many of our streets and neighborhoods. We took this picture 30 years ago in Sydney on George Street. These women needed to all gather together to cross the street. And unfortunately, this is the experience that people have in many downtowns and main streets across the world. And when you do that, you're more likely to want to spend more time in your car and go to a mall next time. And downtowns can't really survive when you have to cross the street like that. And the effect that this is having on children is really substantial. So there are recent studies, this has been redone in many different contexts around the world, but the radius that children are allowed to play today has sunk in 90% over every 20-year period. So every generation is the radius around their home that they're allowed to play is going down 90%. So there's older people in the audience, you were allowed to play many times the distance much further than people growing up today. And that's the core of the environmental crisis. If children don't feel safe or connected to or comfortable in the world beyond their home, how are they going to take responsibility for that or help shape that world? So so we see placemaking as nibbling back, as taking responsibility for and shaping this world beyond our home. And we don't think the way to change that paradigm it's not to be against the car, it's to be for places and for people. So we think if you plan for people and places, you get people and places. And that's what we did in New York in Times Square. We suggested a trial and in many other places around the city, and people thought it was a terrible idea. The businesses hated it. There was a huge backlash from the press. The transportation commissioner almost got fired. Now it's the thing that people most love, that they most loved about the administration that did it. The businesses are thrilled about it. But we just suggested an experiment, and closing traffic right through the busiest part of the city, and by testing it, it was proven to work. So literally these chairs, they didn't have any nice chairs ready, so they went to the hardware store down the street and bought $35 beach chairs and just put them right in the middle of the street. It wasn't that hard. So when you focus on place, you do everything differently. So we think a focus on place is really getting back to the common sense that built the communities we love, built the things we most love about our communities. And you think about the best main streets, the places you most love. They were essentially created because every business, every person participating in that community was almost competing to contribute to that community. The way that the storefronts worked, the way the interactions that people had on the street. That's what had built up these great places over time, and built up people's love and affection for these communities, and forged the connections, the social capital that sustain them. But we've sort of forgotten to focus on place. We've focused on moving traffic, or narrow approach to economic development, or lots of important things, but environmental issues or health issues. Those are all important, but we see place as a means to often address a lot of those without even realizing it. So we've gotten to apply this lens, this focus on place, in most kinds of contexts around the world. We've been working on Harvard's campus for the last 15 years. We've been working in slums in Nairobi. We've been working in Malaysia. I was in Jakarta recently, and work all over Latin America in different contexts. And it's really the same simple principles that make people feel comfortable, and that people want to be able to shape their communities. And we've sort of forgotten how to do that again. I think the biggest crisis in the world is that we're at a low point in how we participate in shaping our communities. And to be able to take on the bigger crisis is we need to build capacity to work together effectively, creatively, constructively to shape change. And it's not about, we think the best way to prevent your community from changing for the worse, if there's something we're trying to prevent happening, we think the best way to do that is actually to have a vision for what you want and to work towards that. And we need to attract investment in people on our own terms. The best places that thrive are the ones where if new people are coming in or new investments coming in, and they come in because of the strong vision that community has for itself, and they come in and add to that vision. The communities that lose their identity, their values, are ones that don't have a strong vision, and it's not articulated well in the public realm. They're the ones that suffer the most often. So how does a placemaking process work? We won't go into too much depth, but it's pretty simple. You start with the community, and people identify their favorite places, their opportunity places, and we have some ways that you go out and evaluate the space. You listen to each other, you learn from each other what works, what doesn't work, and you come up with some short-term experiments. And a lot of the ideas the community can do themselves. A lot of them don't cost a lot. Businesses can do them. But the most important part of the placemaking process is that you're learning to observe, to make mistakes, to try things, and to build the capacity to keep improving your community and work together to do that. So we think we're moving we think there needs to be an evolution of how we shape our communities, from one that's very project-driven, where we just sort of ask government to build a road, a park, a playground, a school, a library. Better than that is discipline-led, where you build a nice road, a nice library, you hire creative experts to do that. Better than that, we think, is place-sensitive, where your process is, you get a lot of community input. You make sure you're being responsive to local culture, history, environment, different economic inequity issues. But where we think we need to be trying to get to is what we call place-led. So the best outcomes come from when the community is all working together to create great places, to create shared value in the public realm, and you're all working together to build your capacity to do that together. So you're not relying so much on experts or anyone to do it. You're working. We think the best places are created through multi-sector collaboration. You look at them around the world. Often one sector leads. It could be the community. It could be the mayor. It could be the private sector. But it's how they come together to work in collaboration that really makes them thrive and be sustained. I've found it working a lot in Australia that you have the local government is really innovative and progressive, and that's really effective. And you need more of that. But it's a lot of the challenges is in the U.S. we have government isn't as progressive, and so there's more volunteerism and philanthropy in business improvement districts. The businesses are doing a little more. So there's strengths and weaknesses to all of it, but I think there's room for evolution here in terms of broader collaboration between these different sectors. And that's it's always a challenge, but that's where the fun part is learning to partner and that everyone in a community has a lot to offer to a placemaking process. So what is placemaking? Placemaking is strengthening the connection between people and the places they share. It's we're on this planet to connect with each other and to connect to our place, and we think we best connect to each other in places that we love, and we best connect to our place through being around and creating that with people we love, or that we want to connect with. So it's how do we need all kinds of connections. We need places where people make eye contact with each other more, smile at each other more, but also enjoy being with the people they love and their family more too. So it's all kinds of connections that places can support further and really create the most important moments and time in our lives. But placemaking is also a collaborative process by which we can shape our public realm in order to maximize shared value. So it's not, placemaking isn't just the stuff, it's the process that we work together with. So it's a community process. It's an organic process. It's about localizing and making it special to your community, adding what the ideas that you come up with, the things that come out of your community are the most authentic. Increasingly, placemaking is being seen as economic development. It's what attracts investment, keeps investment, keeps money circulating within your local economy, but around businesses that are really connected to place. Good local businesses need places, and places support local businesses. It's sort of changed, and and big box stores are much less connected to place. They thrive when places don't, and they take value in tax dollars from places, from good places. The placemaking scaled to each community, and it creates social capital and place capital. So I'll just tell you a quick story of where the place we're actually working the most in the world is Detroit, and we've heard a lot about how it went bankrupt and how it has failed. But about 100 years ago, it was one of the most thriving cities in America, and this was before the automobile really took over and the automobile industry took over. But around the 2000, this is the exact same place. So you see this monument right here. This is now surrounded by a sea of traffic. And so between the traffic engineers and the automobile industry, they took out the life and the value of that city. So, but around that time, we did a vision for how to create a center again, how to create a place, working with people around the city, and said, what would bring you down here? What do you most love about your community? What are your favorite public spaces in the world? What do you want to have at the center of your city? In this case, they had to raise $20 million to build this vision. The government, the public sector had no money, so this was all raised through philanthropy and some corporate contributions. But that $20 million investment attracted billions of dollars of investment in the blocks right around it, and got companies to move from the suburbs downtown, because this was an anchor for place attachment. And so it has really come to life in recent years. And a few years ago, we did a plan to sort of build on this throughout the sort of a public realm plan, doing what we call lighter, quicker, cheaper. We think a lot of the best public spaces are created in the short term through a lighter, quicker, cheaper approach, and sometimes in the long term too. We're seeing a lot of really successful public spaces that are not using a lot of heavy urban design. It's temporary, low-cost materials. So in this case, we put a beach right at the center of Detroit, because people that can't afford to fly somewhere to go to the beach could go to the beach here. But also, just plywood shacks and movable seating, and all of a sudden people were coming here on a regular basis, and people from all over Detroit, spending time there. People that don't usually mix and connect are connecting at the center of the city. And this was right during the bankruptcy that we did this. So we think that in a way Detroit reflects this model of a city that we think is going to succeed most in the future, is one that not only is livable, but and offers a lot in terms of amenity, but it's one that everyone feels like they can help shape. So we're no longer going to just consume cities and compare them in that way, but cities that are truly creative are ones that everybody's helping to shape. And these are the ones that are going to create great places that are more livable, and actually are also more lovable, that have that attachment. So we think most cities transform themselves around their places, their destinations. A great place, we think, has at least 10 reasons to be in it. A great destination has at least 10 places, each with 10 things to do in it. And a great city has at least 10 destinations or districts, each with 10 places in it. And so we think New York has, in the last 30 years or so, has transformed itself, not through any big changes, but really through these series of public destinations and how they've changed. In most cases, in the case of New York, the city government didn't have much to do with it. It was community groups that had a vision for these places, sometimes business groups, and how they evolved. First, they were often against something. They were against the city tearing down the High Line or against development. but it's how they moved from being against something to being for something that made them really start to be successful. And then even more importantly than that, how they moved from being for something to starting to organize, to build, to fundraise, to build the capacity to implement and then manage these public spaces to help. Because management of public spaces is the most important thing we'll talk about. It's not the just getting it built. It's how does it get sustained and programmed and improved continually over time. So I mean, you may know some of these spaces, but you know, Bryant Park, Rockefeller Center, Times Square, Union Square, Washington Square, Brooklyn Bridge Park. These are the places that really define New York City to locals and tourists alike. And they all have great community-based stories behind them. But it's how they work, you know, at this place scale that's key, and how each place has a range of different things to do in it. So and these things are all, some attract, you know, different age groups, different backgrounds. But it's how it connects these people in a place. So you know, I have 2 small kids, and I hate it when I have to go to a playground where there's no place for me to sit and nothing for me to do. But if there's a playground where I can sit and get a cup of coffee or a beer while I watch my kids, that's one of the coolest places in the world. But there's very few places that combine those types of uses. But so you know, the Power 10 is the idea, but it's just purpose, giving people a purpose to spend time in that space, to stop, to slow down. We need slower cities and main streets where we can have an excuse to make eye contact, to get to have a good conversation, to window shop. To make retail work, you need slow streets where people really want to be there first and foremost. They don't. They want to spend time there because of social reasons first. That's and farmers markets and public markets are really helpful for making that happen as well. So we did this exercise, this Power 10 exercise in Melbourne, something you could do for your community. And green dots were the places they love in Melbourne. The red dots were places they avoid, they feel a little unsafe, or the dangerous intersection to cross. Yellow dots were opportunity places. And they realized that, you know, Melbourne had great urban design, and they, you know, lots of transit and biking and stuff, but they hadn't created that many lovable places. But the yellow dots were places where there's a few reasons to be there, and if they add a few more reasons to be in those spaces, they might become green dots. And you know, the tourism people saw this, and they said, oh, well, you know, that would get people spending a day or 2 here instead of just half a day. Early on, one of my first trips to Australia, we did a training course with the Sunshine Coast, and you know, after sort of the day, the workshops, the CEO of the city, this is something they created, said, you know, instead of just evaluating different departments based on, you know, safety and design and recreation, maintenance, economic development, what if we evaluated everybody's success based on, are we creating great places? And you know, how would that create more collaboration amongst the council staff? And then how would that change the way they participate with and engage with the community as well? And so that was a real epiphany for us, actually, and something that we've been helping to institutionalize within many city governments, you know, around the world, is what we call place governance, and how a focus on place can shift the culture of government. One of the places we've done that most is Adelaide, Australia, and they started this program with a lighter, quicker, cheaper program. So their goal was to move towards placemaking essential to the whole government. But they kicked it off with just trying to do things. Let's just try to do some activations. And you know, this is, you know, what David Anguich does, is let's just get out and make stuff happen. And actually, Stephen Yarwood is coming to speak tomorrow night as part of this same program. He was the Lord Mayor that helped do a lot of this work. But the idea is doing the activation. The activation wasn't the point. The point was to make some stuff happen, and then through that, have a conversation about what do you like, what do you not like, how can you make this better, who in the community's got some energy to help organize this further and do this in their part of the community. So it became sort of it's building momentum, showing that things can change a little bit, creating some, you know, sometimes there's some bad press, some controversy about it. Great, had an even better conversation. People learned more about it. So the idea is it just got some good conversation going, good learning. And one of the requirements, if anything, there is they could take it out within 24 hours. So so they tried some pretty wild things, and some of them were kind of silly. And these were some painted old cars that they put in there with the big trees in them. You know, it was a fun idea, but they said, oh, it wasn't quite worth the money that they cost, so they didn't keep doing it. But this has really shifted the perception of Adelaide for locals and tourists, and seeded a lot of activities on their streets and their laneways. And I've been back many times now, and the life of the streets have really taken off, and the perception of the city, the place attachment has increased a lot. They did the same exercise there. They've started to evaluate the success of their districts based on the place criteria. But in evaluating, the point isn't just to get the data and evaluate it, but to have these continual conversations with people in the community, to survey people on the streets, and keep learning and keep assessing this. And it's more and more their responsibility. They said the goal of government, the CEO said that the goal of government isn't to just deliver better places, it's to build the capacity of the community to do this work themselves, to shape their own public spaces. And so there's actually the idea is to sort of devolve government a little bit to the city government, to the main streets, the districts, and get more merchants participating and helping to finance and improve the main streets. The other place we've done a lot of work is in Perth with the Metropolitan Redevelopment Authority. A few of their projects, but most directly the Cultural Centre. And this was, a project I think built in the 60s or 70s, this sort of brutalist architecture that wasn't so attractive and hadn't had much investment. And we did a whole detailed plan of activation, with them all, and they didn't follow any of it, which was great because what they did, what they really asked us to do was just shift the culture from just project-based, sort of waiting for the next big expensive improvement to revitalize this and have some designer come in and fix it all, to just facilitating each of these institutions to figure out what they can do themselves, and how no one of them alone would have done anything or even had much of an impact, but together they all had a lot of the ideas, the resources, the skills to do this, and within short months they did a lot of it. This was before, and they created a pond amphitheater there. This is what it was like, sort of dead space before, and they just put very light planter beds and turf and elements. This was the cafe before, just putting out seating. So there's lots of little things that together added up to making a big difference. Different types of markets, but this is a cultural district. I mean, this isn't just a place you go to the theater to watch, but this is a place where there's all kinds of maker culture and people creating culture, and not just consuming culture, and more people probably go to the theater because of it, and doing things before and after they go to the theaters and the museums there. The ice rink, the evening activity has increased, the media facades, but then the wildest thing, it's an example of how, we never would have suggested most of what they did, and we didn't actually. They came up with it themselves through this process. The wildest thing that we never would have thought of is they did a Dachshund Model UN. So they talk about participatory government. This is another form of that. So anyway, but just like different government departments are often siloed and professions are, so are communities. So you can do the same thing in your community. Simply, how the library connects to the different businesses, to the churches and the hospitals and the parks and the theaters and the city hall. They all have placemaking skills and resources. It's how we look at the public realm between them as the responsibility of all of these to activate, to brainstorm. That's really exciting. And simply often just convening partners in these different entities. With the community, you come up with a lot of ideas, and it doesn't have to be big things, but if everyone does a few little things, you can really start to change the perception of the community. But a couple thoughts on design, because we were picking on cars and traffic before. We're still, just leading with design isn't enough. And I have seen a lot of efforts to just, hire a good designer and hope things change. This is the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain, by Frank Gehry, who was a Pritzker Prize-winning architect. I went there on my honeymoon, and it was a beautiful piece of sculpture, but as I got closer, the life of the city kind of died off. And I learned later that Frank Gehry actually says, "I do not do context." And so this is sort of reflective of an era of, it got a lot of attention for the city, but it really actually pushed away and didn't respect the values and life of that city, and the public spaces around it reflected that disrespect. But it sort of promoted an era where we've sort of relied on the designer alone to come up with a creative solution to fix things. And so this was, it was hard to find the entrance, and this tourist couple had come up the stairs and was sort of resting on those steps. You step the same time each time on. It sort of made them feel smaller, and you feel smaller and smaller as you go in there. And we went around to the waterfront because I thought that would be an active part of the city. And I took a picture of these two men to articulate this idea, that William White had said that blank walls proclaim the power of the institution in consequence of the individual for whom they are clearly meant to put down, if not intimidate. And moments after I took this picture, these two men mugged that tourist couple of their camera. So there's no reason you couldn't have created one of the safer, more friendly places in Europe in this spot. The rest of the city was quite vibrant, but because of the holding up architecture alone as an icon, they've created essentially an unsafe place. So, but as you move away from the building, people are friendly and affectionate and comfortable again. So so our buildings should create comfort and connection. And indeed, even the Pope thinks this. He says in his encyclical, "It is not enough to seek the beauty of design. More precious still is the service we offer to another kind of beauty. People's quality of life, their adaptation to the environment, encounter, and mutual assistance." So that's really, the Pope is a great placemaker. And he actually said a lot of things that were very valuable around this topic. But how do we create social capital and connections through places is key. Jane Jacobs, who's heard of Jane Jacobs? If you guys, a bunch of you have, she wrote a book. She's sort of our patron saint for good city making and placemaking. She said to approach the city as if it were an architectural problem is to make the mistake of substituting art for life. So we think we need to design from life for life, so from communities for communities. And we need to make architecture, not just beautiful and functional and new and exciting, but also we think we should be asking of buildings that they should generate life. They should add life to the spaces around them. They should support their context. They should create places in front of them. This is in Melbourne, in front of their public, their city, one of their city hall buildings. This one, where it's one of the slowest places in Melbourne. People are most likely to stop and hang out. You can play chess, watch chess, lock your bike, get a drink of water, look at art. You can get some food. There's public seating, private seating. It's all layered together, and it's the front of a public building. But it should support its context. This is in my neighborhood in Brooklyn. This is the slowest place in the neighborhood where you're most likely to stop and talk to somebody or go in. And it's nothing too fancy. It's just the way that store has created this place that is sort of a gathering spot. And then most importantly, does a place support human connection and comfort? So you've won when you get people, all different types of people on one bench hanging out. So where are the places where people are going to be comfortable, affectionate with each other, expressive? Those are the places that people remember most and that create place attachment, keep people coming back to your community, keep you wanting to hang out in the downtown of your community. And so this is becoming a very different way of shaping cities. In Pershing Square in Los Angeles, the Central Square, we've been asked to help sort of redo their Central Square, and we did a vision that then became part of an international request for a design competition, and the winning one was a the name of it was called Radical Flatness. So that it was just a platform for life and activity, essentially, that now you have to program and manage. So, and it's part of this larger effort in downtown Los Angeles that we're facilitating around how to connect the innovation economy with place, and how to support innovation, create the new jobs. The tech innovation is part of it, but they're also looking at cultural innovation, and we're actually looking at food innovation, that local food economy, the public market that's there, as key as well. So this connection between place and innovation is, we think, relevant to all kinds of neighborhoods and communities, but it's also making sure that the innovation economy has shared benefits with the existing economy, with the existing populations, that it's not just an isolated economy where the money just leaves the community. I think I can skip over, these are principles of placemaking and innovation. But just wanted to sort of close with this idea that we're seeing place and placemaking as sort of a global movement, actually, that's pulling together and coalescing a lot of other movements. So we've worked with the leaders of the environmental movement, the design community, historic preservation, local food, people, climate, and are showing how a focus on place can help more fundamentally address many of these causes. But also create broader collaboration between them. And we're working with UN Habitat to make place and placemaking part of the new urban agenda that gets set every 20 years by the UN. And it's not dictating anything on communities. It's saying we need to help communities help and to allow them to define communities more for themselves, to start the shaping of cities with public spaces and with places. And we've convened quite a few conferences. One of them was in Adelaide with people from over 100 countries helping to set this agenda of place and public spaces as central to the new urban agenda. One of our board members who used to work at UN Habitat says we're creating a global movement to shape spaces into places. So public space is good, but places are public spaces with purpose and meaning for that community. We're a not-for-profit organization where our job is to learn from and connect and share what communities are doing, how they're innovating. Follow us on our, we have a free newsletter that we invite you all to sign up for, and we're on Facebook and Twitter. We have a placemaking leadership council. There's a few members here tonight that are helping to lead the placemaking movement globally, people from all over the world, and they're actually gathering in Vancouver in September to help articulate this placemaking movement to UN Habitat's UN-wide conference the month later. But I'd love to take any questions and learn what are some of the issues that you're facing that placemaking may be able to support.
Okay, thanks very much, Ethan. So just a round of applause for Ethan.